It's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, my hometown, out on the edge of the prairie. It's May, it's been perfect, it's been sunny, it's been in the 70s, it's been absolutely beautiful. People sleeping at night with the windows open, and then they wake up to the sound of birds singing out in the trees. Such a beautiful, beautiful time of year. We should all be perfectly happy, but there are these bachelor farmer tendencies within a lot of people, complaining and griping about things, whinging, bellyaching about things, finding something that's wrong. Politics is the perfect expression for these people, is the realm in which people who are 96% in agreement can find a way to despise each other, and issues that they can come to blows over. Oh, we see it over and over again. People complaining about big government. Of course, every election they do. Big government gave us this defense program, which, as one little offshoot, gave you this little gizmo that you have in your car, this GPS, and this beautiful woman, Australian, I think, who gives you directions. The benefit of this single invention, to get directions from somebody you're not married to, who says turn left in 0.2 of a mile, and if you don't, there's no recrimination. There's no, oh, you never listened to me. There's none of that. They're just recalculating route. This is a product of big government. It came about as part of the defense program. People ripping into the banks in politics. But I mean, look at the cash card. What a beautiful thing this is. It was invented by banks over in Britain, but now they brought it here. We used to have to go in and hand over a check, and we always got Mildred, the old cashier, with the enormous eyebrows, and she sort of wrinkled up her lips and the mustache, and she gave us this hard look, and she went back and she talked to Mr. Inkvist over there behind the partition, and finally, grudgingly, she came back and she gave you your $20 in cash. And she said, "You've been cashing a lot of these lately, and she counted them out, and she said, "Now don't do crazy things now, don't spend it all in one place." And this very same Mildred left town 21 years ago with a suitcase with $220,000 in cash in it the week before the bank examiners came, and she got on a plane and she went down to Buenos Aires, where she lives now in royal splendor down there. No longer that grandmotherly lady that we knew. Her hair is now crimson red, and she's lost a lot of weight, and she lies in her backyard behind a wall, and she lies there on a chaise in a two-piece bathing suit. We never saw that before. And she drinks this beverage out of a glass with a long stem, and she smokes a cigarette in a cigarette holder. She's down in this neighborhood of Buenos Aires where all of these, well, a lot of former Sunday school teachers, actually, down there, and bank tellers and wrestling coaches who, went bad, and rogue priests and tax cheats and cops who were on the take, and nobody ever suspected this until it was too late. And they all are down there in this neighborhood in Buenos Aires, and along with some old Nazis, and they all go to the same church. It's a non-denominational church, just very simple liturgy, no confession of sin or anything, just no offering, just communion, and they love the hymns, and the sermon is all about, nature, trees and flowers and so on. And no, Mildred, that bank teller, her brother Jack was my uncle. He married into the family. He's not blood relative, but he married in. He married my Aunt Evelyn, who was just good as gold. And but Jack had these bachelor farmer tendencies. He's just very restless, and he could not settle down. He went to church Christmas Eve and Easter, and he sat in the back in the skeptics row. Sometimes I sat there next to him, and he'd turn to me and he'd say, "It's all a fairy tale, you know that. When you die, you're dead. There's just a hole in the ground. They put you in the hole, and that's the end of it. And the worms crawl in and the worms crawl out. And all there is to it. He believed that there is nothing one person can do for another person, really. He said, we are islands in the sea of life, and seldom do our peripheries touch. I tried to tell him that these islands only appear to be separate, that down below, down deep, they're all connected. They're part of the earth's crust. They're not floating. He said, well, you look at it your way, I look at it my way. He had had this big experience back in 1947. He had been picked up by the tornado of 1947. It was in August 1947. He was marching in a parade as Uncle Sam, wearing that big top hat, and this storm came up suddenly, and he ran to go get in his car, and it lifted him up and swirled him around. This was the same tornado that picked up crates of bowling balls off a freight dock in the town of Millet, and 48 bowling balls dropped on Lake Wobegon on this one afternoon in August and hit nobody, landed on pavement, broke a few garages, and that was all. There was also a box of umbrellas. There were umbrellas, and there was Uncle Sam, and there was a two-door Ford sedan, and they were all swerving around in the dark. It was an amazing tornado. It dropped him into a tree, which broke his fall, also broke his arm, but he wasn't severely injured. And he came back to find out all these pockmarks in the pavement of Main Street where the bowling balls had landed. This had driven panes of grass through blades of grass through panes of glass, and had driven a seed, a quackgrass seed, into the right ear of the statue of the unknown Norwegian, which stood there on Main Street. It was a statue that had been bought at auction of some famous Norwegian, an author or somebody. Nobody knew who it was, so therefore the name, and they had no idea that he was famous. Ole Thorvaldsen paid for this statue, and it was set up on Main Street, but they couldn't have money for the pedestal, so it was just standing there like anybody else, and had his hand sort of outstretched like he was asking for money. And this quackgrass seed was embedded in the right ear in 1947, and every year after that, it sprouted. This big, long stem came out, which the Thorvaldsens thought was undignified, so they would pull it out every year, and every spring it came back. Some people thought this was silly, and other people thought it was inspirational, so who knows. That was the same summer, just a few weeks afterward, that he played in an exhibition game with a barnstorming team. Babe Ruth was batting cleanup on this team. The Sorbitol All-Stars came to Lake. You can look it up, and you got Google there. And Babe was dying of cancer, but he needed the money, and he went out on the road with this barnstorming team, and they played our town team, and he was so sick he could not play the field, but he came up in the ninth inning, and Uncle Jack was playing out in straight center field, and Babe Ruth came up to the bat. He was dripping sweat, he was thin, looked anguished, and the home team knew what they should do. They grooved one right over the plate, just a nice fastball, and he came around on it, and he lofted that way out there, and Uncle Jack went running, backpedaling back all the way to the fence, and people were screaming. Thousands of people were there. He was backpedaling all the way to the fence, and now he saw to his horror that he was going to be able to catch it. But he knew what to do. He knew what to do. He leaped, and he caught it, and he crashed into the fence, and he fell to the ground, and in the same motion he took the ball and he put it up his sleeve, and then he stood up and he held out the empty glove, and people cheered, and hundreds of boys ran out into the cornfield to try to find that ball, which turned out to be the last home run that Babe Ruth ever hit, except it wasn't, but it was. And that and the tornado and our town atheist, Uncle Jack, were really, and the quackgrass in the ear of the statue were the things that really distinguished this town. Otherwise, we were just like Holdingford, we were just like Melrose, any other town up there in central Minnesota. He told me all about this when he took me fishing once in the middle of the night. He'd had bad dreams and he couldn't sleep. He was dreaming that Evelyn was coming after him, and she had every reason to because he had taken off with this other woman, Lorraine. He had met her in a bar in Winthrop, Minnesota, Buster's Bar on Main Street. He met Lorraine. Lorraine worked for all these mortuaries all around central Minnesota. She would go around, and her job was to make sure that the person was dead. And she said, you can't always tell. You can't always tell. And you have to make sure. And the only way to make sure is to poke them and slap them hard. And you poke them up under their arms. And a lot of people don't want to do this to, the bodies of people whom they knew in life, so they call me in, and I do this. I mean, the people have been buried alive. Relatives looked at the corpse in the coffin and they said, they look so alive. And then they thought about that for years, and then finally they had the body dug up, and there the silk and the cushions were all torn to pieces, and here was a note written that said, "How could you do this to me?" So that's what she did, and Uncle Jack made her promise that she would do the same for him when his time came, and she promised that she would make sure that he was dead, and then she went about making him feel very alive, if you know what I mean. Anyway, we went out fishing in middle of the night, and he told me all about this story about this baseball, the true story about it. And he was so drunk. Well, he was drunk, and he was so carried away. He stood up there in the boat, and he recited. Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself has said, "Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. Twilight and evening star, and one more bell for me, and may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea." Well, I didn't want to hear crossing the bar, sitting in this boat out in the middle of the lake, which was leaking at the time. And I kept my foot on it. I just didn't appreciate hearing I want to meet my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. So I rowed back in, and I rowed into the dock. And he said, "When I die," he said, "you sell that baseball. It's out in my hunting shack, and you can have the money from it." Well, it didn't turn out that way. He died in the winter of 2001. My Uncle Jack, this old atheist in our town, he was 88 years old, and that ball sold for $27,000 in auction in New York, and the money was claimed by the insurance company that had paid the claim when Mildred embezzled all that money from the bank, and they took all of it except for $800, which the town debated what to do with it. They debated what to do with it, and they decided to buy a powerful herbicide, and they injected it into the right ear of the statue of the unknown Norwegian. And they eliminated the one thing that really distinguished our town. I don't mind that the money didn't go to me. I didn't really expect to get it. It's just that they used it to wipe out this landmark, this stalk of grass. I wish you could have seen it. I really do. And the last atheist who died. Lorraine could not bear to slap him and poke him. When she came to look at his body, she just could not bring herself to do it. And so she buried him with a Bible and a flashlight and let it go at that. But that's a whole other story. That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.